All right, here I am, Rob Costa reporting with Adam, a local anarchist artist in Plymouth. Is that the right description?
Yeah, that's a good description for these purposes. Yep.
What about you makes you an anarchist and an artist?
Those are just the reason I'm an anarchist is because I don't believe in institutions. I don't believe that I need to be governed by any other group of people. I don't think I'm a fully, functioning adult with a good mind and a good constitution. So I don't need someone making decisions for me. And I don't believe in systematic oppression that comes from such institutions. And I'm an artist because that's one of the activities or daily work routines that I like to do. And I like to share my art with other people. I believe that that's an example of free associations, which anarchy promotes.
Well, it seems like Google's Gemini took a bit too much artistic liberty with its free associations when people were asking it to show historical images that were apparently misusing the races of the participants in the images or mis showing them inaccurately. So the
So you
question,
mean that so if there was a picture of like say George Washington, it depended on what user was viewing that or looking for that image, and they
it
would
seemed like
reflect
it just
that user's
wouldn't
race.
it just wouldn't show him as being white no matter what. And I remember reading, I think the only way they got it to show images of white people was by saying show a photo of like people eating chicken, and then it figured out to that it would be less offensive to show or more woke to show it to white people. So has it gone too woke? Is that impacting?
No, I don't think that's too anything. I think it's just kind of humorous, you know. I mean, it's I don't think there's any danger really in what you've just described. We're already told lies about history before and after Gemini, so um, I'd be more interested in not computer renderings of how George Washington looked, but what he did, his political economy under his administration, under his regime. Um, the way he described Native Americans as wolves who needed to be driven out of America in order for the U.S. to expand itself. That's more something that I feel like is dangerous to cover up than the color of his skin, which is just, obviously just, I don't know.
It can be
I don't
lit
know what the
gray. They
repercussions of
thought that George
showing a black
Washington.
George Washington are. Really, I don't. It's kind of nonsensical, but other than that, I don't see any danger in it.
Some people might disagree, or at least think
I mean,
that
we showed Jesus as white, and he was definitely not white. He was from the Middle East. He was black skinned. So I think we already dabble in that, anyways. So
well, the image
I don't see any
generation
harm.
feature is taken down now as a result of what has been a bit of a public uproar around this.
What groups are offended by this?
Well, let's
Let's
take a
bring in
look.
FreedomWorks chief economist and co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, Steve Moore. Steve,
Okay, looks like a nice guy. So the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. What do you think that means?
I don't know if it's a think tank or an actual committee in Congress, but either way, it's sounds like someone who's ideologically trying to fight for what prosperity represents, I guess, in this context, which is economic exploitation. So
Or it
someone who's very
mean
committed to capitalism.
it could mean prosperity for all of us. What if he was about to unleash prosperity on you and I? Write us all checks. Would
Then he'd be
that
then he'd be a socialist and he wouldn't belong to the Republican Party.
good point. Well, let's see what he has to say from Las Vegas.
All right.
made some phone calls, talked to people in the technology industry, and this was actually intentional. on behalf of Google. See, the people who work there, and estimated like a couple thousand people worked on this project. They see themselves as trying to shape society around their political and ethical values, and trying to make sure that there's representation in all of these images. But the representation is in the present and in the past, doesn't include white people or straight people. In fact, when people asked to see Nazi soldiers, they were Asian women and Native Americans.
It's a heck of a story. And, you know, I hate to tell people at Google this, but actually George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were white. And no matter how they tried to misrepresent history, those facts will still be ingrained in the minds of most Americans. I don't like the rewriting of history. I think it's fallacious. You know, we study history because we want to know what happened and who did it, and that's, you know, so we don't repeat the mistakes of history. And the fact that these folks at Google and other of the technology companies are kind of distorting that history is a real strike against them. And by the way, I'm not one who hates these companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon. And they're amazing companies. They account for over half of the gains in the stock market. So we're all getting rich off these companies. But come on, let's be accurate about how you depict history.
But Steve, if you Google a political story, you'll get left-wing garbage sites for 4 pages long before you get to a conservative article. So this is a left-wing company. And
for the record, I Googled like Gemini, and this Fox News thing came up, which I don't believe is 4 pages of left-wing articles here. So it's not always the case, but this doesn't seem too different from like Hamilton casting African-American actors as George Washington or Lafayette. I guess
that's what came to mind too when I saw this. But yeah, go on.
The question is, maybe could this be miseducating our youth if they were to search for what George Washington looked like on Google Gemini and get confused?
No, I think the intention of, like they said, it's intentional. I think the intention of Google's technology in this case is to just let Black people see Black people in their history books. You'd hope that you'd focus on, I mean, their history, you know, that they look up, but you'd hope that instead they'd really focus on, you know, actually decolonizing our history textbooks and what we, you know, have our children have access to, instead of just kind of ahistorically substituting, you know, like they said, Native Americans for Nazis and etc. But it'd be more useful if they actually talked about, you know, critical race theory and decolonizing the, you know, canon, instead of just these like sort of haphazard, like superficial nods to populations that have been oppressed for generations and excluded from the history books.
So the problem isn't that it's being too woke. The problem is that it's just not being effective in its efforts to be woke, to portray different populations. And
I think the problem is that it's saying that this is what woke is, and that it's claiming propriety over, you know, the process of of being quote unquote woke. I mean, like, it's definitely not, you know, really engaging anyone in any sort of you know, meaningful historical like knowledge. You know, it's using visual cues to pacify people into saying that the, you know, a system where Google is, or, you know, other corporations have control over information is okay, you know, because they're disseminating this information in a politically correct way. Whereas I think that, you know, people should have a freedom to be encouraged to access archives and find primary sources and be encouraged to engage in those sources. And I think it is dangerous to completely destroy, you know, the idea that an image is real. You know, it really represents reality, because you know, images are part of the archival record. So if you're completely demolishing the accuracy of images on a platform like the internet, I feel like you're kind of harming the process of teaching kids about history in general. Because, you know, how are kids gonna engage in history if like it could all be, you know, something that had been AI generated?
Is AI itself a bigger issue then, regardless of whether it's woke?
Is AI a bigger issue than this? Is that what you're
Sounds like
asking?
what you're saying is that regardless of whether AI is generating images that are showing the wrong skin color, the fact that we're using AI generated images at all is itself dangerous, regardless of whether.
That was part of what I was saying. Yeah, but it's also who's programming the formulas that these AI are running on. I mean, because obviously, you know, you can program them to, like, this program that we're talking about with Gemini. You know, that the AI has a certain goal that's programmed into its algorithm. So, um, you know, it's who's making the goal for these super fast, you know, devices, or super, you know, sophisticated devices to accomplish that goal. So who has access to making that goal happen, and how is that going to affect their platforms, is definitely a huge discussion
Should we
that we need
trust
to be
Google with that?
Should we trust Google with that?
Mhm.
No, I don't. Absolutely not. I mean, that's even less oversight than like trusting, like, you know, a government with it, because it's just yeah, I mean, I don't think any corporation should have the power to have a tool that the general public doesn't have access to. That's part of the mystique of these technology companies, is that they have intellectual property rights over their, you know, aspects of their technological innovations. So it's supposed to increase the mystique and power of these organizations like Google, in order for them to continue profiting off of our ignorance or our lack of access to this technology.
Let's watch some more.
All right. I can't hear it.
Think they're sorry.
Is it sharing the audio now?
Change their ways.
Now I got it. Yeah.
They're just going to do a better job of hiding their bias.
You know, what you're talking about Google, one of the things that I find personally really annoying is if you Google Steve Moore, the first thing is going to come up is Wikipedia. And almost everything in the profile of me on Wikipedia is fallacious. It's actually slanderous material about me. And I keep taking it down, you know, and saying, wait a minute, this isn't accurate stuff. And then they keep putting it back up again. So it's a big problem. But look,
sounds like really paranoid.
Anybody's head and tells them they have to use Google. I mean, I think the problem for Google is their reputation is going to take a hit if they continue to do this. Now, when I talk to, you know, folks at Google, they still kind of deny that this is happening. And so, but look, the pendulum is clearly swinging the other direction. Just as an example, what's going on with some of the DEI stuff in these companies, and also with respect to ESG, there's a real swing against that because of the conservative, pushback on this. And it's thanks to shows like this that people are being informed of what you can believe and what you can't.
Google thinks it's doing a social good, Steve, and this is just evidence that their technology is garbage. Dulles Murray has a piece that's in the New York Post that was published this afternoon, and he said, I've long known this. He asked people in Silicon Valley what the hell was going on when you would try to Google images of happy, if you said, show me straight couples or white couples. He said, if you ask for straight couples, the first things that come up are like lessons that, like how queer lessons for straight couples. Or if you ask for white couples, you get mixed race couples or black couples. And again, it is intentional. And Google is trying to catch up to all the other leaders in AI. garbage. All right, sorry, real quick, and then I'll let
Seems a little
Tom
upset.
pick this up.
Do you think that this is a form of oppression against straight white people? The fact
No,
that being able to see images of themselves here?
no, you can look at any, form of mainstream media and find an image of any movie, any TV show, any um, cartoon, any book, picture book, anything. You can find examples of white, heterosexual couples anywhere in our culture. It's actually hegemonic in our culture. So I think that there's no problem with, from my perspective, as I don't know, it's just there's no problem with countering that with other interpretations. I don't think, and who's googling, who like needs to Google heterosexual couples? I just don't understand why that's like, I don't know. I just don't see why that's even something you need to seek out, because there's so
It
many
could be that
examples.
as part of evaluating some of these tools for bias, you do want to try certain words, keywords that you're not sure how they're going to respond to it. Just trying out, will it show bias if you Google heterosexual couple or homosexual couple, and perhaps they're just noticing, strange, it's not showing us the heterosexual couples. So has it gone too far in trying to protect the other things that might be Googled here?
Do you think that most culture there's a bias towards heterosexuality?
Historically,
That's
yes.
what I would argue, that there's already a bias towards heterosexuality in every single other aspect of our culture. We live in a heterosexual, like, dominated, cultural landscape. So yeah, there's definitely a bias. I mean, sure, there's a bias in the rest of culture as well. It's just not seen as a bias because it's considered the norm. It's considered normal to be heterosexual. So there's no bias because it's just reality, according to those people at Fox News.
What do you think they should be upset about then, if not this?
What should Fox News be upset about? I mean, Fox News as an entity should be upset about this. Yeah, this is very much in line with their interests, their interests as a company, because they want to. Well, when I say concerned, I mean this is great for them. This is great. This is just good programming for them, for their demographic that they're trying to target. I mean, no matter what
They were looking out for the
topic
best
they cover.
interests of their demographic. Would they be covering this, or would it
No,
be
no,
something else?
no, absolutely not. They're looking out for the best interests of their bottom line, of their executives, just like any company would. So I don't see anything different about Fox News reacting this way than any other company trying to promote its brand. I mean, like, let's like Google doing this is exactly the same as Fox News reacting to it. They're all just brand ambassadors for their own brand. It just happens to be that we get our information and our public discourse is structured by these companies. So their brand allegiance and their brand promotion is what's first and foremost in their minds and in their programming, not accuracy, or not what's in the well-being for their demographic.
All right, let's take a closer look and see if I can play that again. Okay, can you see it again?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, look what's happening with the remake of Snow White, where, now that's just a fairy tale, but they're completely rewriting it as if, the Prince Charming was the villain in this because he tried to kiss Snow White, and that's a terrible thing. Dagan, you can't be doing that. And that is, sexual. So this rewrite of our classics and the real history is something we all have to be very careful of. And that just means, look, if you go to any kind of news site, you have to be a discerning viewer and a discerning reader to know whether or not what you're being fed is true or not.
Even on Fox News.
Yeah, and I just want to say, that yeah, he's right in that respect, and people are discerning viewers when they look at these images on Google, on Google Gemini. They know they're thinking human beings. So I think people on Fox News like to treat the American public as if they're really dumb, um, you know, robots who can't think for themselves. But not everyone's really like that. So I don't think anyone's going to be hurt by these images.
Do you think his advice should be applied to his own medium of using a discerning perspective when you're
No, because you can't. There's nothing to discern other than it's propaganda. It's I mean, if you're asking a propagandist to um, you know, encourage discernment of its propaganda, that's just defeats the purpose of its whole, enterprise. So no, I don't think that you can be discerning and watch Fox News, really. I mean, I'm trying to. It's giving me a headache, but you know,
let's try a little more. All right.
Want to move topics on it because there's one thing that everyone agrees on in America, and that is that everything is way too expensive. But it's curious how different parties are on how to address this issue of rising prices. Instead of trying to get prices down, here's one Democrat doubling down on this insane idea.
Congressman Lee, you're sticking by the $50 an hour minimum wage?
Let's be honest. First of all, we have to talk about what it takes for people to live in California. We have a huge affordability crisis. The cost of living is much too high. We have to think about and talk about a living wage. What does it mean to have a living wage in California? Over $100,000 in many parts of California. People are just barely surviving. They're living on the edge. So we have to think about what it takes to make sure that people can afford to live in California. That means a living wage.
All right, Steve, give us a basic economic.
I mean, that's sort of because of both rich liberals and rich conservatives in California, arguably, but it was an interesting suggestion.
My reaction to that is just it's just like rearranging chairs on the Titanic in a way. I think that the problem with that idea of a $50 an hour minimum wage is that companies are gonna fire a lot of their workers to try to keep up with that. The problem isn't that people aren't paid enough. The problem is that we have a system in which basic human necessities have to be bought and sold. So if you enforce like a $50 minimum wage, companies are going to charge higher prices for everything in order to keep up with that. So it's just it's you can't just like put band-aids over the system that's enforcing inequality over people, and putting a price tag on things like housing, food, and education, and other things like that, that people need. So no matter if you give people a protection in terms of like a minimum wage to get that, get your living needs met, get your basic income to be better, more, and you can afford more things, the prices are gonna go up. That's gonna cause inflation. So it's just there's always gonna be a way for the capitalists to get around it.
What would the anarchist artist solution be for these rising costs and inflation?
What would be my solution to rising costs and inflation? It would be anarchy.
And how would
It would
that
be
solve it?
you wouldn't need to work meaningless jobs for 8 hours doing repetitive tasks over and over again,
Because we'd all be like
for other people other than
developers, or
yourself, for people who can pay for those services, or for companies who are selling those services. You wouldn't need to spend the majority of your time on Earth doing that. And
we'd all be fighting each other because we're anarchists. Or am I?
no, there's nothing of it. No, I mean, first of all, people already fight each other, and we're in the opposite of anarchy, right? So, there's, and second of all, anarchy is not the idea of chaos. It's just the idea that no one is enforcing, these things like an economic system on you. So you could go out and do whatever you want. You could live with whoever you want. You could, you know, do whatever you want in an anarchist system. It's just the idea that I'm not, being like governed by another man or woman or group of men and women. So that relates to the economy because, this isn't a surprise. It's actually, like inflation, the overall world has been, the world's currency has been inflating, by an average of 1% per year, I think, historically since the 1400s, since the invention of capitalism, commercial capitalism at least. So, you're always going to have periods of inflation, and then the idea that so basically there's always an expansion of the economy based on an innovation that a company that creates a monopoly for a company. They're allowed to lower prices, so that spurs on inflation. And then there's always like a retraction, right? So and in order to counteract that retraction, they need to expand capitalism's reach to more and more peripheral, remote regions. Historically, that's been the pattern. So to infuse capitalism with more capital, basically. But so this is just a very predictable cycle that goes on, and politicians like to get us to care this way or that way about what's happening in a way that allows them to make decisions for us, and validates their decision making. But inflation is just what things are worth, right? Or what things, how our money can, well, it's really how much our money's worth, but it's also tangentially how we value other things vis-a-vis money. But if you take money out of the equation, we would have much more of a society that is dedicated to things that people actually want to do and what they actually need to have. So, enterprise, free enterprise, competition, those are all very natural human emotions. But another, side of that is there's another side to humans that is cooperative, that is collaborative, that is loving, joyful, social. And capitalism is a very antisocial system that causes people to deny their own humanity. I see a homeless man, suffering in the street. There's nothing I can really do to solve the problem of homelessness. So I'm disengaging from what it means to be human and care about another person. So it's an unnatural system that's being imposed on people who don't inherently follow those rules. So, and yeah, of course there's going to be inflation, and then there's going to be, a period where they, tighten interest rates, and interest rates, go up. And that's just so then companies can get greater returns on their investments. Interest rates will go down. It's just a reaction to these things that are inherent within capitalism that we're told are huge crises, but it's just always going to keep happening, no matter who's president, not black or white, but like blue or red.
Interesting. Well, let's take a closer look at that video and see if they have any more insights for us about the economy or
Sure.
capitalism or AI, because diversity of perspectives is always fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Economics 101. If someone is worth $15 an hour, but they're forcing companies by way of government to pay them $50 an hour, what happens to that employee?
Yeah, you're talking about not just millions, but tens of millions of Americans would be laid off. I wasn't
jobs.
clear whether she
What
was
you were
talking about
saying.
the state minimum wage or a federal minimum wage when she was
Sort of on the
talking.
same page as
But
this
if
guy.
you're talking about a federal minimum wage of $50 an hour, every unskilled person in America is going to lose their job. Every teenager. And by the way, I remember my first job, guys. I think I'm a little older than the two of you. My first job was working in a warehouse for $2.15 an hour, which was the minimum wage back then. But if you saw off those lowest legs of the economic ladder, you can't climb up the ladder. By the way, do the math here. It's 2,000. The average person who's working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year with 2 weeks off, that's 2,000 hours by 50. That means every single American will make a minimum of $100,000 a year. The inflation is going to go through the roof. Every price, you're going to pay $30 for a McDonald's hamburger.
Right. She is screwing over the people she insists she's helping. And
No, it's just sad that we have to allow these corporations to hold us hostage. You know, that we can't allow people, as much as I would support the idea of people being able to afford, you know, basic necessities, which is definitely something I believe in. But, you know, it's unfortunate that we allow corporations to hold us hostage, you know, that by threatening us to, like, you know, have to pay for, you know, higher products. It's not like, price isn't a function of what something's worth. It's a function of what those who have control over property say it's worth, you know.
Fair enough. And who has control over property in this sense?
You know, the people who own it, you know, and in this sense, that's you know, this kind of conglomerate of people in government, in power, in you know, in certain groups that, like, you know, companies that like, there's kind of this alliance between the elite companies in this country and the government. It's not like a explicit alliance, but, you know, like, for example, like, even like under the Obama administration, he was a very, you know, he was a Democrat, and his you know, a lot of members of his cabinet, especially in the who dealt with the economy, were from, like, Goldman Sachs, or, you know, economists who were under Clinton and Bush, so Bush Senior, Bush Junior. So, um, you know, it's all just kind of a block of people whose interests are preserving the status quo and preserving the profits of those who either control them or who run things. And it's just, you know, they've created a meritocracy system where um your worth as a worker is basically um your ability to generate revenue for those and generate, you know, worth basically for those people up above to um benefit from. They don't even have to work. They can, you know, that all they're doing is just organizing, you know, the money that they're swimming in, basically. So that's the idea of, yeah, I guess, who owns the property is just, you know, and a lot of, in most of our tax, if you think about it, like, the government owns our property in a way because they tax our property, right? um so in order to even have property, even land, they tax the land, they tax, um you know, if you're a fisherman, you have to get a commercial fishing license, and that is where, like, you know, your product's taxed. Whatever you do, it's taxed. And no matter if it's a natural resource or, you know, a basic human necessity like shelter. um but all that money, you know, majority of it goes to our war machines, goes to our military, goes to, you know, so basically, who owns property? It's basically the war machine owns property. The whoever, you know, is making bombs owns our property, you know. They're the ones who are taking the value of our property and using it to kill people, basically.
And in this anarchist world, there wouldn't be killing of people, the ideal anarchist world, because that's not how I would usually imagine anarchy, but perhaps I'm imagining it wrong.
So whether or not there'd be killing people, so whether or not the act of killing people would exist in any human society isn't clear to me. I don't think that's something anarchy could really answer, or an anarchist could really answer that question, because um, I think that a system that kills people is more dangerous than humans that kill people, because a system doesn't know what a human being is. A system can't um, love a human being or understand a human being or empathize with a human being. It actually allows us to commit more violence because we don't have to see the people we're committing violence against. We don't have to experience their anger and their anguish and their suffering and the suffering of their families. We don't have to live with that. It's in a remote spot in, our minds, because we're not the ones killing people. But we are our livelihood is goes towards killing people. Our property is taxed in order to kill people. So a machinery that does that is more harmful, I think, than taking the power of that machinery away. Basically, there would be no authority that says you should be killed for this abstract reason. The state kills people, the country kills people now. The death penalty. People die from neglect all the time. An anarchist, I made the connection earlier in one of your videos about anarchy and the idea of indigenous life historically, and the similarities between the two. Neglect in an indigenous society was almost unheard of. Like, there was, English observers of the Native Americans who lived in Plymouth, or what was called Patuxet back then, where I'm from, commented that there was no hunger, that there was no homelessness, that if a neighbor didn't have enough food to eat, that someone else would help them and wouldn't let them starve. So there'd be a greater human connection to your neighbors, the people you're around. So there wouldn't be a need to go off and kill a bunch of people in a remote place, because there's nothing to profit from in anarchy from doing that. So that it would naturally not be incentivized like it is today. Today it's incentivized to kill people and create the machinery to do so. It's called the military industrial complex. Our economy runs off of that violence. Our economy would cease to function if there was no war. Many of the economic downturns in this country have been solved by war. In a sense, you think of World War II, you think of even the 2003 Iraq war and the war in Afghanistan. We were going through an economic recession at the time when we invaded Iraq, and Afghanistan, and that completely solved that economic crisis, at least, because it expanded the weapons industry and allowed them to profit, and all sorts of industries profited off of that war. So I think that there'd be much less warfare if we lived in an anarchist society.
Would it be inevitable for people to start to sort of congregate together, though, if they think they need to do so for their own protection? I mean, isn't that the idea of the social contract, that you need to give up certain individual rights, and then you gain the protection of your government? So if people are not grouping together in the social contract, giving up some rights to become part of a protected group in a government, are they more vulnerable?
Are they more vulnerable? No, because there's no there's no human need to organize like that. There's no human need to organize like that. That doctrine is something that like the idea of a social contract, right? That was invented by people in France and England, two of the biggest monarchical and imperialist states in modern history. It was so that philosophy was invented by them in order to prop up the divine right of their kings and queens to rule over people. So that had nothing to do with, an anthropological sort of necessity. And actually, what's the problem with nation states and government in particular is that when you throw technology into that system, it can quickly turn into an arms race, right? And so the idea of introducing technology that's a result of a highly uh, segmented society whereby there's a social division of labor that allows you to develop these highly sophisticated technologies for killing people. Those technologies wouldn't exist in a context where they're not useful. They're useful because France and England wanted to take over the world and essentially did. So that's why a gun is useful. That's why a gun and weaponry is useful. But if I was living in an anarchist society, what would be the point of going around killing people? There's no system that would organize that would benefit me from doing that.
What if you needed to be protected from other societies which were more organized and which did pose a threat?
Yeah, I mean that's the argument today, that's the argument for our military today is that, and that's the argument for an arms race. That's an argument for what's called sociologically the prisoner's dilemma. It's the idea that I don't trust you, so I'm going to make my decisions based on the idea that you've already violated my trust or that you might violate my trust in the future. But that's no way to live. I mean, that's a very cowardly way to make decisions about your life and the world. It's a way that it's based on fear. It's based on paranoia. It's based on anxiety, basically. So if I were to live my life afraid of the worst possible scenarios that life could throw at me, then it would be really hard to function. So I don't think that just because there's something that could happen, that it will happen negatively. But in terms of this world, like today, I think I could really easily imagine there being a more human world, a world more connected to being cooperative. But yeah, I mean that's a very deep question. That's a very deep question. I think if you were to take away the structure, then there would be a lot of peace. There'd be a lot more peace. There'd be if you took away the incentive to gain more territory, gain more power, and just made everyone on an equal footing, I don't think that I don't think that there'd be that much more violence than there is today, and there'd be significantly less, in fact.
What if I wanted to point to like Afghanistan as an example of an anarchist society? How is that working out for them? Or is that
First
not
of all, it's not an example of an anarchist society. First of all, um, Afghanistan is basically so first of all, Afghanistan is a country that was made into a country by colonial powers. It was divided up, not according to people's traditions and traditional, ties, community ties or cultural ties, but it was divided up, checkerboarded, so that parts of what was different parts of Afghanistan, like and in Iraq and everywhere in the Middle East, were just put into these artificial chambers called countries that were very antagonistic towards the idea of people's identities before these nations were created. So no, Afghanistan is not an anarchist place because it's a country. It's a country, and it's in a region that doesn't have any resources. That it doesn't have the it's had its resources basically like stolen from it. Doesn't own its own resources. So Western powers have basically decimated that area ever since. You can even look back at the Soviet Union and the US's covert wars in Afghanistan. It's just been kind of like a war zone for a long time. The city of Kabul used to be a place of learning and beautiful city full of gardens and clean streets, center of culture, and it's since been torn apart by basically people who aren't allowed to govern themselves, so they seek alternatives in more extremist pockets, or more extremist leaders who prey off of their weakened position in order to gain a quick temporary power. But yeah, I mean, it's warlords, it's people exploiting the overall situation of the Middle East within the context of global capitalism. There would have to be a global sort of like transformation. You couldn't have. It'd be really difficult for one country to be anarchist, because it just. I think there would have to be the whole world would have to be anarchist, or else it wouldn't work. But no, Afghanistan is not anarchy. It's colonialism.
Interesting distinction. Well, let's try to wrap up this video. We got about 2 minutes left to see what insights we can glean. Let me share the screen again. Here we go.
Say all of the fast food restaurants, with the new $20 an hour minimum wage going into place in April in California, are raising their prices. McD's, Chipotle, Jack in the Box are all jacking prices to pay for it. But on that note, on the note of the higher cost of living, it's forcing Americans to take on more debt. Consumer debt, not the only problem. Consumer debt's at a record $17.5 trillion. The national debt also soaring north of $34 trillion. That works out to be about $265,000 per taxpayer. But on the consumer debt, Steve, credit card delinquencies and particularly auto loan delinquencies have soared to the highest level since the Great Recession. This should not be happening, as John Carney has said, with unemployment as low as it is.
Yeah, it is. It's a big problem. I think it's this kind of hidden black cloud on this economy right now, is this massive amount of debt, not just at the government level, which is $34 trillion, but the multi-trillion dollars that consumers are borrowing. And you've got this kind of undercurrent now where more and more people are amassing this debt. The interest rates are going up. They can't pay it. The banks have made the loans. I think the financial structure is really unstable right now because of this debt culture. And by the way, the debt starts with the U.S. government, and now you've got the Biden again for giving more student loan debt. I think Americans think, oh, I can take on all the debt I want because Uncle Sam is going to forgive me for my mortgage debt, my credit card debt, my my auto loan debt. I mean, somebody's going to have to pay these bills.
And I think the thought is, not me, someone else will pay it. Steve, are we at the tipping point, the place of no return?
I hope not. I mean, I hope we get through this. I know a guy who's going to solve the problem. He's a guy running for president right now.
You know what? Grow the economy. Don't spend any more money. Give us a little time. We can get there. Yeah. Steve Moore, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for being with us on The Bottom Line. Thank you.
See you guys. Take care.
All right. Oops. So that was interesting. It seems like there's a suggestion that Donald Trump would fix the debt problem. Do you think that he would be able to do that?
No, nobody. No, particularly not him. He's yeah. I mean, yeah, but
He seems to have had
no,
his
no,
own problems with debt in the past, from what I can tell.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So no, but I don't think anyone can really solve that problem in a piecemeal fashion. Um,
Is
it's
anarchy the
lunacy.
solution here?
What'd you say?
Is anarchy the solution here once again?
Hey, I might be biased in saying so, but yes, it is, because this is a problem that uh is just part of a capitalist nation state's, reality, the reality of living in a capitalist nation state. Um yeah, so I mean, the idea that we should be outraged over the amount of household debt in this country coming from that news station is just political posturing, because they absolutely believe that in the premise that we must have people pay for basic necessities, and the way that we have, as a society, determined that people can do that is through lending, mechanisms in our economy. um, so like, the Federal Housing Administration was created after the Great Depression. Instead of guaranteeing everybody a right to housing as a basic human right, which the UN has said is a basic human right, um, which we don't afford our citizens here today, or the people living in this country here today. Um, no, instead of that, the FHA was created in order to spur, basically the mortgage institutions, so to lending institutions in the U.S. To still have control over the housing market. So our solution has always been never just to guarantee people housing; it's been to guarantee banks that lend, mortgages. So, and we have Republicans are the ones who double down on that process, because they're the ones who during Reagan's era started to uh, integrate the um, financial sector um, more fully into the housing sector, um, by wrapping, by creating, like, secondary mortgage markets, in which you can, you know, um, take someone's mortgage and use it as part of a portfolio. um so that's something that was liberalized by Ronald Reagan in the 80s, and that's kind of the hero of Fox News. So um it's interesting that they're criticizing the idea of accumulation of debt when the mortgage crisis is in a way uh part of Reagan's, policy making.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Augello. We need to wrap it up for now, but this has been an insightful conversation with a local anarchist artist, and I look forward to further conversations as the political and financial situation in the country and the world continues to evolve.
All right, thanks for having me, Rob.
All right.
Long live anarchy.
Always love your insights. Have a good
Thank you.
night.
You too.